Okay, let's talk about Boat. You know them. They're an absolute titan in India's electronics market. But, and this is a big but, despite all that massive success, the company is really at a critical crossroads. They're getting ready to go public. Again, so the big question we're asking is, can this giant actually stay afloat?
So to really get a handle on Boat, you first have to understand the sheer scale we're talking about. I mean, look at this number. Last year, they sold 34 million units. 34 million. That is just a staggering figure, and it tells you everything you need to know about their brand power. But that incredible scale, it actually hides a much, much more complicated story.
Which brings us to the central puzzle, right? How can a company that sells tens of millions of products be facing such an uncertain future? It just doesn't seem to add up. Well, it's a paradox, and we're going to break it down for you, starting with a look at just how dominant they really are.
All right, Section 1, India's audio giant. First things first, let's just take a moment to appreciate the sheer size of this operation. Seriously, it's not just big, we're talking about a force that basically defines the entire category. I mean, their dominance is it's consistent and it's staggering. Look at these stats. Boat is India's #1 personal audio brand. They sell more than a third of all personal audio devices in the entire country. Think about that for a second. That kind of scale makes them the world's 4th largest player by volume. And how do they stay on top? They are absolutely relentless, launching over 100 new products every single year.
So, with that kind of dominance, an IPO seemed totally inevitable, right? And sure enough, back in early 2022, they filed for a huge 2,000 crore offering. But then, the market soured. Investors got cold feet on companies that had high growth but, really thin profit margins. So by October of that year, the whole plan was off the table. Now, they're back for a second shot, but with a more modest plan. The big question is, what's different this time around?
And to understand that, we really need to look under the hood, see what engine is driving this whole company. And here's a spoiler. It's less about the tech and way more about something else entirely.
Okay, so their strategy is what you'd call mass premium. The playbook is actually pretty simple, but it is ruthlessly effective. The idea is to just flood the market with a ton of good-looking, feature-packed products at prices that are just irresistible. Think about it. It's aspirational, but at the same time, it's completely accessible. But, and this is key, this approach comes with some pretty serious downsides.
Yeah, because when everyone is playing the exact same game, how do you stand out? Let's be honest, there's very little that truly separates a Boat product from its rivals, like Boult or Noise. What this does is it creates a commoditized market, a space where there's no deep technological advantage, no real moat to protect them. And the result of that? Well, it's brutal competition and profit margins that are just paper thin.
And this quote really gets to the core of the business. It says, underneath its consumer technology engine, it's really a marketing company. And that's it right there. If the technology is basically the same everywhere, the real differentiator is the brand. In this sea of lookalike products, Boat's biggest advantage is simply that you've heard of them. At its heart, Boat is a world-class marketing company that just happens to sell electronics. So you might be wondering, how does a company that's so focused on brand over tech actually create its products? Well, let's take a look. Let's see how a Boat is built. It's basically a 3-step process. Step 1, they don't invent the core tech. Nope. They source all the key components, things like chips and batteries, from specialist suppliers around the world. Then, step 2, their in-house team, called Boat Labs, takes over. This is where they design the custom circuit boards, the software, and, this is the most important part, those cool-looking outer shells that give the products their signature style. And finally, step 3, it all goes to final assembly. And where that final assembly happens, well, that's seen a really dramatic shift. If you look at this, just 2 years ago, less than 40% of their stuff was assembled in India, meaning the majority was made elsewhere, mostly China. Fast forward to today, and that number has flipped completely. Over 75% are now assembled right here in India. This is a huge strategic pivot, right? It lines up with the Make in India push, helps them dodge tariffs, and gives them a lot more control over their supply chain. And a huge piece of this Make in India puzzle is a key partnership they have with Dixon Technologies. They formed a joint venture called Caliphonics, and this thing is a manufacturing powerhouse. It handles over 37% of all of Boat's Indian-made units. So yeah, you can see how this relationship is absolutely critical to their whole operational strategy. Okay, so they make all this stuff, but where do they sell it?
Well, as you can see, they're still heavily reliant on the top two e-commerce marketplaces. We're talking over 55% of their sales happening there. But, and this is important, they've made a really serious push into offline retail that now makes up almost 30% of their business. And that's a crucial move, right? It helps them de-risk from being way too dependent on just one or two online channels.
All right, so we've covered the brand, the products, and the operations. Now it's time for the really juicy part, the numbers. What do the financials actually tell us about what's going on with this company?
And wow, this is where this story gets really, really interesting. For a company that was famous for its explosive growth, their revenue, well, it's stalled out. It's actually declined a bit over the last couple of years. Now, this is definitely not the high growth story that investors were hoping for back in 2022. But what if I told you that this decline wasn't an accident, that it was actually a deliberate, strategic choice?
Because you see, while the revenue stalled, something pretty remarkable was happening to their bottom line. Look at this. After 2 years of some pretty significant losses, a 129 crore loss in FY23, the company clawed its way back. They actually turned a profit of 61 crores last year. So the big question is, how on earth did they pull that off while their sales were actually shrinking?
The answer, it turns out, is a strategic retreat. The wearables market, especially smartwatches, proved to be just an incredibly tough and complex nut to crack. So Boat made a really difficult choice. They decided to drastically cut back on their wearables division. Now, this move absolutely crushed their overall revenue numbers, but, and this is the crucial part, it stopped the financial bleeding and basically rescued the entire company from sinking into more losses.
So what does this retreat mean for the company today? Well, it means they are now more dependent than ever on their original cash cow, audio. A massive 84% of their revenue is now coming from that one single category. And here's the problem with that. The audio market, their core business, is pretty much mature now. Growth has slowed way down to the single digits.
Okay, so this brings us to the final section, and the big question. With their financials looking a lot more like a mature, stable company than a hot, high-growth startup, what does the future actually hold for Boat? Are they about to ride a new wave? So let's just summarize the core challenges they're facing right now. First, revenue is plateaued. Second, those profit margins in their core audio business, they're not just thin, they're actively getting thinner, eroding from over 9% down to about 6.6%. The competition is still absolutely fierce, and they still don't have that proprietary technology moat to defend their turf. These are some serious, serious headwinds.
And here's the bottom line. Boat is, you could argue, the best business in what is an incredibly difficult and crowded category. They are the undisputed market leader, no question about it. And yet, all of that dominance, all of that massive scale currently translates to a profit of only around 60 crore rupees. It's not obvious at all how they make that number dramatically bigger from here on out.
Which leaves us with one final and I think pretty provocative question. In a sea of products that all look and feel pretty similar, is a famous brand really enough to keep a business like this afloat? Boat has built an absolute empire on the back of its brand, but in a market that's defined by commoditized tech and just cutthroat pricing, is a famous name truly enough to guarantee success in the long run? Well, that's the multi-billion rupee question that investors are going to have to answer for themselves.